Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Glynis McClure, Farm and Ranch Management Analyst with Nebraska Extension and UNL's Center for Ag Profitability. Find an archive of past webinar recordings along with a schedule of upcoming webinars on the Center for Ag Profitability's website, which is cap.unl.edu. Today, we're looking forward to sharing some exciting work from the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, including how producers take an active role in answering questions that impact the productivity, the profitability, and long-term sustainability of their operations. Joining us is Laura Thompson, a Nebraska Extension educator and co-coordinator for the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. Hi, Laura. Laura Thompson is an extension educator at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, working in the areas of agronomy and agricultural technologies. She coordinates the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, which works with agricultural producers to conduct field-scale research on their own operations and makes use of their agriculture data that they are collecting. Laura's research interests are in the area of reactive, site-specific nitrogen management. Laura is a certified remote pilot and certified crop advisor with precision ag specialization. Laura earned her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, both in agronomy with a focus on soils. Laura grew up in southeast Nebraska on a family grain farm, growing corn, soybeans, and warm season native grass seed. She and her husband, Nathan, are actively involved in the family farming operation. And then joining us also is Don Beatty, who farms near Lexington. Hi, Don.
Hi there.
So Don Beatty and his wife, Barb, farm near Lexington, Nebraska. The Baties have strong ties to Nebraska Extension. In the past 5 years, Don has conducted 17 on-farm research studies. They also host many exchange students, and Don is a very avid historian with lots of great locally specific knowledge and involvement in the Historical Society. I don't know details on these so that's good. Anyway, we'll learn more if he wants to share. So anyway, Laura, I'll go ahead and turn this over to you.
Great. Can you see the big slide or the full screen? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for joining today. I'm excited to be able to share a little bit about our Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. To give you kind of a quick overview here of where we'll go with the program today. First, I'll give an overview of our on-farm research program. Then I want to spend a little bit of time just sharing some of the research results that I thought might be of interest to the group. And then we'll hear from Don Beatty. And so I'm really excited that he's joining and we'll be sharing his perspective as well. So to get started, our Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, the goal is really to provide a structure across the state that allows producers, crop consultants, industry, our commodity organizations, and UNL specialists and educators to jointly work together and collaboratively work to conduct on-farm research. And so that's really our goal and mission of the program. And the hallmark of that is really strong farmer involvement. So farmers are implementing the trials and collecting the data almost entirely with their own equipment, except for in a few special cases. So farmers are very involved in the entire process of the on-farm research that's conducted. And really, as we kind of think about the power of the on-farm research program, it's really this blending of research and extension. So we're generating a lot of really valuable research data that can help inform recommendations. But at the same time, the producers that are conducting the research are really getting good hands-on experience, seeing how those products or technologies that they're testing, seeing how those perform in their operation, in their growing environment, in their context, their farming context. And that really helps them know if they want to adopt that technology or not. So it's getting really good, relevant local information that can lead to adoption of good practices and products. So this really is a strong relationship between research and extension that really is both generating information, but also directly helping go into that application or adoption side. So I wanted to share just a few kind of high-level impacts of participating in on-farm research. And so this comes from a study that we conducted in 2019, where we asked farmers who had participated in the program for any amount of time, going back about 30 years. We asked them about why they conducted on-farm research and what was the value of doing that. So we found that 95% felt that their results were reliable and trustworthy. So that's a really important one, especially as we think about there's so much information out there, there's so many sources saying different things. And 95%, I think, is a really incredible number, that they felt their results were reliable and that was something that they could use. We also found that 75% put their results into practice, which is really also excellent to see. You think about research that may be done on a research station or somewhere else, and reading about that, how many people would actually take that they read and apply that, probably is a fairly small number. But by doing the research themselves, seeing how it worked in their own operation, we have a really high percentage of people that are actually adopting those practices. And then on the economic side, thinking about what was the impact of doing, making that management change or putting that practice, that new technology or product into practice, was about $31 per acre on average. So that's really also very promising to see. So I want to share just a little bit about the program origins. We have a very long history of the on-farm research program in Nebraska. It got started in about 1989. And that started with just a small group of growers in a couple counties that committed to doing studies for about 3 years. That was very successful, and other efforts were started around the state. And in 2012, all of those efforts that had kind of been going on around the state came together under the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. And since then, participation has really been growing. So you can see the number of studies that were completed, starting in 1990 being the first year with data, moving towards the present. So generally, we now have about 80 to 100 studies that are completed each year. And this is really made possible through our network of local extension educators. So you can see some of those faces located around the state there. And this network of educators is working closely with the producers in their region to help conduct those studies. So helping to design the studies, helping collect data, and that's a really valuable part, important in the structure and support of the program, and really valuable in building those long-term relationships with farmers and agronomists. So along with that, we have some really key partnerships that allow us to sustain and grow the program. And that's with our Nebraska Soybean Board, Nebraska Corn Growers Association, Nebraska Corn Board, and Dry Bean Commission. And these really make it possible for this program to exist and continue to grow and provide this venue for producers to test products and practices. Along with that, we do partner with other natural resource organizations and industry to try to work on more specific projects. So you can see a few of those there as well. All right, so looking a little bit now at how the research is conducted. I think a good word here is real systems. So we're really working in kind of a real world environment with the farmers' systems. And so, as I mentioned previously, farmers are implementing the trials and they're collecting the data using their own equipment. And so because of that, we design each study and each project to fit that farmer. So it needs to fit their equipment, their specific questions, their growing conditions, their soils. So it's very customized. So in all the studies, though, we have a few things in common. So we're helping producers set these studies up using sound experimental designs. And the reason for this is because we know that there's a lot of variability that exists in fields. If we just put out one strip of maybe with fungicide or leave one check strip without fungicide, we know there's a lot of variability. And so we don't have a lot of confidence in those research results. So we help producers set them up with replications. So here you can see that we've got that check and fungicide repeated 4 times. And then we randomize those. So sometimes we have variability in the field or gradients across the field that could cause, if we always put the check, for example, on the right side, we might influence our results because of those gradients in the field. So this is just an example here where we're looking at 2 different treatments, the check and the fungicide. We've got our 4 replications and we've got them randomized. And so this is how that might look and a little bit more customized to a field. You can see the widths are adjusted to be appropriate for the width of the applicator. The field length is, or the lengths of the strips are adjusted for the field shape. And so you can see kind of how that looks in a real world case. Of course, since we're working with farmers in their operations, we also have the opportunity to really work with the technology that farmers have in their own operations. And this is a real benefit as well. So a lot of farmers are able to utilize technologies like GPS to log as applied data. We can log where different treatments go. So in this case, you can see in blue where those treatments were applied, and then in the blank areas where we left checks. And then at the end of the year, log GPS data, or do GPS logging of the yield data and correlate that to those areas of those different treatments. So this can really provide a few opportunities for producers, a lot of convenience, and also allow us to do some more unique experimental designs. So here's one example. This farmer was wanting to look at seeding rate in soybeans. And so this is a field that doesn't have a lot of straight rows. We've got contour farming and terraces here. And there's just not a lot of area where we could put in those field length strips that I showed you before. But in this case, this producer was able to utilize their variable rate seeding capabilities. And we developed a prescription that would change the seeding rates on the go as they move through the field so that we can get in quite a few replications looking at these different seeding rates in the areas of the field where it really is feasible to do that. So this is a field that really wouldn't, it'd be very difficult or impossible to fit on-farm research if we could only do those field link strips. And then this prescription that we create is put in on the go using their variable rate technology. So that makes it very seamless for the producer. It happens just in real time on the go. And then collecting the yield data at harvest, just as they're moving through the field normally, those yield data points are being recorded. And then we go in and extract the yield data points that correspond to those different blocks of seeding rates. So I mentioned this can provide some convenience. We can also fit more of these replications in. Another really important thing is being able to test some lower rates without risk or without as much risk. So in some cases, some producers might feel that this lower seeding rate isn't something very comfortable to them, but we only have a pretty small area of the field, maybe about 1 acre in this case, that's involved in that lower seeding rate. So that can allow people to test some things that maybe are a little out of their comfort zone without quite as much risk. We can also look at how that response to seeding rate might vary in the field based on maybe soil type, maybe elevation. So is our optimum seeding rate the same in this part of the field as this part of the field? Starting to look at some of those questions, which are a little bit more complex things that we can start to address. So a few more kind of unique designs. This is a study that was put in using a center pivot. You can see we kind of have pie-shaped wedges here with just UAN being applied and then UAN with an additive. So applying that fertilizer just by itself or with an additive. And we're able to control those applications with the pivot and then use the yield monitor data from within each of those segments and extract that to determine the response. Another one kind of similar to what I just showed you on the previous slide, but in this case with a more flat square field. we're able to test those seeding rates across the entire field. So here, the entire field has been turned into this seeding rate trial with the idea that we can use this to inform future variable rate seeding prescriptions that producer might want to use. So if we can determine that the optimum seeding rate is different in different portions of the field, or correlate the optimum seeding rate to things like elevation or EEC or soil texture, then we can use that to develop variable rate prescriptions. And again, here, just kind of like that one I showed you on the last slide, this one's looking at different nitrogen rates, again, putting those in this case, along the contours of terraces. So this is the row direction that fertilizer is applied and planting and harvesting all occur on. And again, being able to test some lower nitrogen rates. We also try to use some coordinated protocols, and this helps us be able to generate more data across the state and summarize that. So instead of just having maybe one person look at a specific study, we're able to have multiple people around the state and kind of make some more generalized conclusions about the impact of that study. So in total, we've had over 1,000 studies completed since the beginning. You can see the counties there in red that have had studies. And as I mentioned, about 80 to 100 studies completed each year. So this is the map of the studies that were conducted last year in 2022 and kind of the different topics that those fall into. So we have a number looking at cover crops, crop production. That can be things like row spacing, seeding rate, variety selection, crop protection, looking at seed treatments, fungicide applications, things like that. Equipment, some of these are looking at strip till, some are looking at downforce systems, some looking at planting speed. Non-traditional products, there's always quite a number of those available, biological products that producers are evaluating. And then our biggest category is always soil fertility. We have lots looking at different starter fertilizer, nitrogen management technologies that we can use to better manage nitrogen, optimum nitrogen rate. And so for each of these studies that go on throughout the year, we put together a report of that research study for the producer. And so we have kind of some introduction about it, soils information, and then the results. So if I zoom in here on the results table, we're reporting what was tested, the yield impact, but also we're always taking that to the profit as well. So trying to look at the economics. So we can have cases where we have yield increases, but it's not enough to cover the cost, additional input costs. So always really important to try to evaluate the economic side as well. All of these research results are compiled into our on-farm research book that's produced each year. These are available as hard copies or as PDFs on our website if you're interested. And we share those at our annual meetings. And so these are always a really fun time of the year. They're coming up in February and March, and this is a great opportunity where the producers who's conducted the research are able to share their research results. Others are attending and usually have a really nice dialogue and discussion about the studies. And so you can see that kind of reflected in some of these comments. I like farmers sharing experiences. At the meetings, we get to talk to each other and share with each other. Without that, it would be half the value. And then here, we learn a lot from each other. So really just highlighting that kind of social aspect and peer learning aspect that we really want to foster in the program. And so I put here the upcoming meeting dates. If you're interested in joining us, we'll have meetings in Alliance, York, Beatrice, Fremont, North Platte, and Kearney coming up in February and March. So with that, I think I want to turn now and share a few of the research results that we've been looking at. So a couple here, there's of course with 1,000 studies being done, there's lots of research results that could be shared with you. But I've selected just a few here. This one is looking at soybean seeding rate studies. We've had quite a few of those done over the last 10 to 15 years. And these ones that I'm showing here are looking at planting populations ranging from 90,000 to 180,000. And you can see those data points for each of those 18 studies. The black here is the average of those. So we saw very consistently that we didn't have much yield increase as we increased our planting population. As we look across all of those studies, we can see that that's just a couple bushels or 1 to 2 bushels going from 90,000 to 180,000. And so economically, when we consider the cost of the seed, planting around that 80 to 100,000, 120,000 range is the most economical. So this was a really nice study that a lot of people are just very interested in seeing it for themselves. And so we have a lot of data on this one, a lot more studies that I could add as well. We also have producers that are kind of taking that to the next step then. And so this is one that was looking at optimum seeding rate in different zones in the field. So here the field was divided into 3 zones, this kind of darker yellow, light yellow, and blue. That corresponded to different soil types within the field and as well as different elevations. And so those different seeding rates were put within each of those zones to determine the optimum seeding rate. And so in this case, we saw that as we moved to the higher seeding rates here, we tended to have a little bit lower percent emergence that you're seeing here. So we took stand counts and we also separated that out by the zones. And we also saw that when we looked at the percent of planted seeds that actually emerged, we had a higher percent emergence in that 3rd zone. So this is really helpful data to start guiding how we might do any future variable rate management in these fields or determining if it's even warranted. So these studies need to be repeated over time, but starts to kind of present some ideas of maybe where we could possibly go with management in the future. Another popular one has been looking at starter fertilizer, and this is kind of how those lay out, usually pretty simple to lay out, just looking at with and without starter fertilizer replicated several times across the field. And we also collected soil data across these studies. And so we looked at the soil phosphorus level, and you can see that across the bottom ranging from around 0 to 35 parts per million phosphorus. And looked at how did that yield increase for using starter fertilizer relate to our soil phosphorus level. So in this case, we saw that when we had that lower soil phosphorus level, about 9 parts per million or less, on average, we had about a 14 bushel per acre yield increase for using starter. On the opposite end, when we had pretty high soil phosphorus, 20 parts per million or above, we really had no noticeable yield increase for using starter. So this is kind of the power of being able to combine those studies. Each person did theirs kind of individually, but once we have all these data points, we can combine that and start to make some generalizations and see some patterns that can be useful. Another category here is looking at biological nitrogen fixation. So this is one that's been very popular, a lot of interest in over the last year or two. So you're probably very familiar that soybeans are associated with symbiotic nitrogen fixing bacteria when we talk about soybeans being able to fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere. But there's also non-symbiotic nitrogen fixing organisms that can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere but aren't in that symbiotic relationship. And these are generally very temperature and moisture dependent. We see greater activity in moist soil and warm temperatures. And the goal is really to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and make it available to the plant. And then the companies that are producing this generally are promoting this as an opportunity to reduce synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So one of the studies that we've had quite a bit of studies on in the last 2 years is this product at Pivot Bio. And they have a couple products proven that was used last year and proven 40 that's available this year. So you can see some of the study locations that were conducted around the state. And then looking at the results here from 2021, across the bottom, you can see the nitrogen rate that was used. So in this case, 192, and then we tested it without Pivot Bio and with Pivot Bio. In some cases, we had also different nitrogen rates tested, such as this one here, which maybe is yours, Don, I'm thinking, possibly. So we have a couple different nitrogen rates tested as well. So
yep, that was mine.
Okay. And And so in these cases, we had no significant yield difference for using that nitrogen. Also, no significant difference for the nitrogen rate. So that's really important to keep in mind here as we move forward in this discussion. In this case, there was some significant differences, this Colfax one, and as they moved to lower nitrogen rates from 183 to 153 to 123, we can see a yield decrease, but we still were not seeing that impact from the pivot bio in this case. Continued with several more of these studies in 2022. Here you can see pretty similar results again, only 2 sites that had statistically significant results. In this one, we were looking at the 197 versus 238, did not see any yield difference for reducing the nitrogen rate, and actually had a little bit of a yield decrease for using the pivot bio in this case compared to the full rate. So overall, we put all these studies together, and you can see each of those data points at the same nitrogen rate. And this gray line is the line where we have no yield response. If the points are falling to the bottom right, that means we have a yield decrease where pivot bio was used. If it's falling to the top left, there was a yield increase. So in about 27% of the cases, there was at least a 5 bushel per acre yield increase. In 17% of the cases, there was at least a 5 bushel per acre yield decrease. Overall, when we looked at the data together, it was not statistically significant. And the yields were identical with and without. So kind of a few thoughts here, kind of take-home ideas. Even without pivot bio, we have the opportunity in many of these cases, or in all the studies that we looked at, except for one in the last 2 years, to reduce the nitrogen rate by about 40 pounds per acre with no yield loss. So there's some opportunity to consider how we might fine-tune our nitrogen rates. What does that mean economically? Well, with the current price of nitrogen around $1 per pound of nitrogen, that is about a $40 per acre savings. Assuming you have 500 acres of corn, it's about $20,000. So we have some significant opportunity that we're looking at here. So that kind of segues into the last example I'll give here of results. How do we think about fine-tuning that nitrogen fertilizer rate? So this is a study where we again use that variable rate technology to look at different nitrogen fertilizer rates. You can ignore the pink and the blue in this example and just focus on these colored squares and those different nitrogen rates here. So we had a nice range going from about 60 to 220 pounds of nitrogen, and repeated that across the field. So the field in the background here, you're seeing an elevation map, and it's a lot lower elevation on this end of the field, a lot higher elevation on this end of the field. So we wanted to see how that optimum nitrogen rate might vary based on that fairly significant topography difference that occurs. So again, this was put in on the go using the variable rate controller, and yield data was collected on the go using a yield monitor. So you can see the yield monitor collecting data here and kind of see what that looked like in this specific map where we collected yield data. So what did we find in this study? Here we have graphs of the optimum nitrogen rate. So nitrogen rate is on the bottom, yield is on the left, and these curves represent the yield response to nitrogen, with the red dot indicating our economic optimum nitrogen rate. So on the left side of the field, that optimum nitrogen rate was about 135. On the east end of the field, where we have that low elevation, quite a different response curve here with the economic optimum rate of 243. So a pretty big variation. And so this really helps inform what that optimum nitrogen rate is based on what the grower had typically been doing around 170, some opportunity to save nitrogen on the west end and better distribute that input by using more of it on the east end of the field. So we're continuing to do more of these studies, I think really valuable to help producers find out what that optimum nitrogen rate really is. The last thing I'll share here is some of the resources we have available for on-farm research. So if you're interested in getting involved, we do have some guides like this that are kind of to get started with on-farm research if you're interested in kind of reading more. I talked a lot about how ag technologies, yield mapping, variable rates, seeding or fertilizer can be used to conduct on-farm research. And we actually have a series of courses here that help get you a little bit more familiar with how to leverage those technologies. So that's what this series of courses is. I'm going to go to this one here. This is the Farm Bits podcast. Again, I've talked a lot about some different technologies, and this is a really nice podcast that's produced by our grad students working in digital agriculture, and they're doing an excellent job doing a lot of interviews with university and industry about different ag technologies. So I'd encourage you to check this one out if you're interested in podcasts. And lastly, all of the resources, protocols, how to get involved. If you want to view the research results, download PDFs, that's all available on our website, farmresearch.unl.edu. And so here's my contact information if you'd like to visit more or get in touch or visit about how to get started with on-farm research. And with that, I'm very excited to be able to turn it over to Don Beatty to share about his perspective. And I love this picture of you doing your, I think this was one of your granular studies, maybe getting started.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Well, I'm often asked by farmers, why in the world do you spend so much time doing on-farm research? And the biggest answer I have is if you look at Fortune 500 companies and look at what they spend on research and development, they all spend usually between 5 and 15% of their revenues on research. And I think as farmers, we need to dedicate 5 to 15% of our acres on research. I've been farming since all my life, essentially, but full time since 1980, and I'm still learning. Every year we learn more, and everyone's farm is different. My farm here at Lexington is way different than where my wife grew up around Norfolk. And so the advantage of the on-farm research is that we get to try whatever crazy idea we have, and we get to use the extension personnel to help us conduct a statistical analysis of this and see if it's a good idea and if it works on my farm. It may or may not work on your farm, but it at least gives you some ideas of where to look. As in the introduction, they talked about the 17 studies over 5 years, and we did what, 4 more this year, Laura, I believe. So I've probably done a little bit more. The first year I got started was when we had a new crop production specialist in our county, and she talked me into doing 1, which soon became 2, which soon became 3 the first year, and that's kind of how it went every year. We haven't talked about what next year is going to be. I've done a lot of the ones that Laura talked about. Several of the examples she showed you were mine. I've done the soybean population. We've done a lot of nitrogen management, both the pivot bio as well as doing some nitrogen management comparing to the granular computer model. And those, both the 2 years I've done the nitrogen management with granular, those are both full 80-acre fields that are involved in the studies. And it's quite extensive. It does take a little extra time on my part getting all the prescriptions in and getting it applied right. But then what we learn from it is extensive. It's a valuable thing. But the biggest thing I'd tell most people is that with the GPS technology, this honestly is so easy to do. The extension educators, they do the hard work, to be honest, getting the protocol set up. And when we get into it, it's really pretty easy to program the rates in or the fertilizer rates. And you do the strips that they tell you to do with, and then you take it out and you do the check strips, or you do it the other way around. I usually do my check strips first. The soybean population studies, that was all pre-programmed. It was the mini block that Laura was showing you. We had 4 populations of soybeans scattered about a dozen places in a pivot. So there'd be 4 blocks, 12 different places. And we just planted it with a normal planter, combined it normally. We shipped the data file off to Laura, and she and her grad students did the hard work of pulling that all out. So, but no, we've learned a lot. We also have done some studies of, we have product salesmen come by with a jug of chemical they want me to throw in and it'll make you money. And so I said, well, sure, we'll put it through the on-farm research. And guess what? It didn't make us money. Usually it didn't make any difference at all. But it's one way to get a salesman off your back. I said, I'll try it, but it's got to go through the research first. And Laura was showing you how much money, extra income we've gotten from the results from the on-farm research, but almost more important is what we've saved in not doing products that don't work. I've tried several things that didn't work, and so we don't do them. And that almost is more valuable than the things that make a positive to our income. And every year we learn more. Usually I hit Laura or Sarah Sivitz, my local crop production specialist, up with some ideas of, hey, let's do XYZ. And they're like, oh, we've never done that before. Let's figure out how to do that. So that's, to me, one of the big advantages of the on-farm research is that you get to try out what's important to you and what you think will work. And it helps the university out. Help spread out the cost of research. The amount of research we have in Nebraska is much larger than other states. I visit with a lot of farmers across the country, and many of them will complain that their extension programs or their extension specialists are out of touch with their farmers. And I'm like, well, whose fault is that? You know, if you as a farmer are not going to your extension specialist and working with them, they would be out of touch. And so Nebraska, in my opinion, is probably the strongest extension program in the country. And I do have long ties. I've been been around extension my entire life. My mother was an extension specialist, so I have been around it my entire life. But I firmly believe that extension is valuable. What else, Laura, should I talk on? Are any questions?
If someone was interested in doing a study, how would you suggest they come up with their topic? Like, where should they start?
The first thing is, first of all, I would highly encourage them to attend one of your research webinars or meetings, because oftentimes you're sitting there going through and like, I wonder if that'd work on my farm. Or how about if I do this a little differently? And that gives you ideas on some research for your own farm. And duplicating someone else's research in your farm is valuable, as you mentioned, because the more farms we can test it on, the better idea we have if it works everywhere or if it's a specific thing. Second of all of us have been farming long enough to know that there are certain fields that may not yield as well as they should. And maybe you and your crop advisor have some ideas on how to make it better. Let's test it. Whether that's a different fertilizer, whether it's more fertilizer, maybe it's more water, maybe it's less water. There's a number of things we can test. And I would say, don't be afraid to try anything. As you mentioned, these are fairly small areas that we're actually talking about. And yeah, I've had some things we've tried that didn't work, but typically what did work more than offset what didn't work, as far as yields and the costs involved. The costs really are minimal costs for extra fertilizer. I've done several starter fertilizer studies, and my fertilizer dealer has subsidized some of the extra fertilizer, as long as they had a copy of the data. I'm like, sure, it's public. I don't care who has it. It's being published anyhow. So long as they had a copy of the data, they would help me pay for the extra fertilizer. And so those options are out there.
Well, if people have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll ask you one more question, Don, while people are
Sure.
maybe putting their questions in. So you've had 20 plus studies now conducted. Right. Which one would you say has been, I'll say, your favorite or the most beneficial or informative or useful for you?
The most useful and profitable for me was the soybean population study. And and that started with a prior study. We did, I had a study that we were doing one of these soil amendments with on soybeans. And when Sarah Sivitz came out to do the emergence, she called me up and says, am I figuring this wrong? I'm like, no, you're not. We had some crusting. And so we dropped 180,000 seeds, but we only had 70,000 plants emerge. And agronomists and I had talked, and we looked at the field. It had fairly even distribution of plants. We decided, let's leave it. Who knows? We'll see. We got through harvest that year, and the areas that had clear down to 60,000 plants per acre was still yielding right with the rest of the field. And so it's like, I wonder how low we can go. So that's when I started doing the soybean plant populations. We did 2 years of it. And as Laura had mentioned, they've been doing it for a number of years before. And so Joe Luck with the university helped with this program. And I think we went from 70 to 140, or to 70,000 to 180,000 in my fields. And I wanted to go lower than 70, and Joe wouldn't do it. So we dropped 70 to 180, and the most profitable came in at 110 every year. Both years we did it, and we used the 1 year we had 2 different varieties in the field. Both varieties, 110 was the most profitable. And so we've been dropping 110 to 120,000 seeds. So that's made a major cost savings for us. And we've had less lodging now. When you have lower populations, you get bigger stems, better roots, the plants stand better. It's easier to combine. It's a win-win. I'm not sure why we were ever doing the other thing, Laura, but that was something we had the wrong idea.
So was that on irrigated ground, Don?
That was all irrigated ground, both gravity and pivot irrigated. We've tried.
And so
both.
your population before was roughly what usually?
We were dropping 180 to 200,000 seeds to the acre,
And you've
we're down
dropped
to
back
110. So we're almost not quite half.
Wow.
So that's a considerable savings in cost.
Right, exactly. Obviously, this on-farm research is very related to economics, right?
Correct. Yeah, everything, and that's the whole goal, is to make it economically viable. I mean, Laura showed one of those on the nitrogen management, and I'm not sure, that might have been my study too, that you put up, that, you know, you can have increased yield, but if the cost to get that increased yield doesn't match it, why are you doing it?
Right.
And so that's the thing, when they do the analysis, it always has, you know, we have to put in, that's probably the hardest thing for me, is doing all the paperwork afterwards, is, okay, what date would we put all the herbicides on, what all the fertilizers on, what did they cost, so that when the end, Laura can tabulate up, okay, this costs so much an acre, this costs this much per acre, and this is the returns, this is what the net is. And then you can look at the end and seeing, did the net, was it substantially better or not? Because farming is a business. It's
Sure.
a lifestyle, but it is a business, as you well know. That's your whole point.
So you mentioned that, you know, you have folks that, you know, come by with different products. So you've got industry folks that are aware of course, the on-farm research, as you mentioned. So is that really catching on? Do you have, Laura, do you have a lot of those folks just kind of coming automatically to you, or visiting with other farmers directly to do some more of this stuff?
I think it depends a little bit. There's kind of a couple different approaches. Like what Don is talking about is, you know, a salesperson approaching him to purchase the product for ideally the whole operation, I assume. And he's kind of stepping back and saying, let's see how it performs first. And so that's kind of one relationship or approach, and is great, kind of the grassroots or organic, you know, relationships that happen. We do have companies that'll approach that, you know, contact me, and we set up kind of a more formalized agreement to do some testing. And so it depends kind of what their philosophy is, what their commitment to research is. If it's a very, I'll say, kind of shallow collaboration where we're just looking at a few farmers or trying to help sponsor a couple farmers trying something, or if it's very in-depth. And so some of those that I mentioned have been very in-depth, where the company is very committed to trying to have a deeper understanding or see how things are working and sponsor graduate student involvement and can be really more impactful collaborations with more output. So it varies quite a bit and kind of, how much, it depends on the company and their philosophy and how much they want to do. But I think what Don mentioned is really important too, and that's occurring in a lot of cases around the state as well. And I'd love to see, it happen even more as producers get approached with different things.
And we've done some mechanic equipment as well. For example, we did install the ag leader down pressure and electric seed drive system on our planter. And the company approached me about, hey, let's do a trial just so I can show what this is worth. And I said, sure, we'll do it through OnFarm Research. And so they partnered with us, and they actually flew their drone over the fields and shared some data with Laura, and we worked back and forth. But again, that was a combination of they wanted to see the research done on farm, on real farm examples. And so by using the on-farm research, I was confident that what we had would stand up to muster.
I think that's I didn't really bring up any of those examples, and that's a more complicated,
that was complicated.
I mean, and you've already made, or you had to make a significant investment in that equipment. And so I really appreciate that you were willing to test it. And I think, the company obviously wanted to see that as well, because that's really hard for people to evaluate something like that. You can't, it's not like a product where you buy a small quantity, put it on a few acres. You have to make the full investment in this equipment. Right. And so the only way we can really offer that data or help people see the impact is when someone is already willing or decided to make that investment and then take a step back and check how it's performing.
And I would also say, I want to give a shout out to the extension specialists. They are integral partners with us. Laura's the overall head, but she had the map up of the extension educators across the state. And I work with mine extensively. And a lot of times if she has questions, she'll bounce it off of Laura or off of one of the other extension educators. But, for example, in the one with Ag Leader, it was doing emergence counts. And so when the corn started to emerge, Sarah was out every morning for 2 weeks straight, putting popsicle sticks in my field by plants. And we did both a down pressure and a speed studies, and each of them had 7 replications. So there was 14 strips for each one. So 28 strips she was going out and measuring, and each strip had 3 counts she was doing. So she was putting out several thousand popsicle sticks every morning. And that's something I wouldn't do. I'm sorry. That's not what I want to do. But that is the advantage of having crop specialists that care about the research, and they can help do that type of data acceptance or recording. And that makes a lot easier for me.
Yeah, that's dedication. And all I can think about too, Don, is from what you have done in this program is the information you have and how you're helping others too.
Right.
So yeah.
It's a collaborative thing. And I go to the on-farm research meetings, and Laura's right. We have a vigorous discussion amongst the farmers about, if we're going to do that trial again, how could we better do it? And a lot of times we do these more than 1 year. I've done some 3 years in a row. But by talking to the other farmers, we get different ideas. And they said, well, we tried it this way and we did it this way, but that sounds better. And so again, we're all trying to get better at our jobs.
Yeah, good.
And it is competition sort of with farmers, but in Nebraska, I've seen a lot more collaboration than in a lot of industries, I think. And so farmers care about everyone raising the bar.
That's awesome.
And we all want to do a better job. And environmentally, We want to raise the best crop we can with the least inputs. We don't want to have pollution. We don't want to have nitrates in the groundwater. And so we all want to get better at that.
That's great. I guess one other thing I was kind of wondering about is, is that the capacity to do more of this on-farm research, and is it possible for somebody just about anywhere in the state to do a trial or whatever? And like, again, is there a time frame, Laura, where folks need to sign up?
Sure. So yeah, we're always welcoming new people to be involved in wherever they are in the state. I can't promise that there's going to be someone to put 1,000 popsicle sticks in the field in every part of the state. But with what I've kind of showed, how we can set up the trials in advance, set them up through prescriptions. I've worked with people in all corners of the state and sent prescriptions that are being executed on their machines, and we're working directly. I've never met them or seen them face to face, but we can have this collaboration. So yes, there's ways to work with people wherever they're at. As far as when to get started, it really depends on what the question is. So if we're thinking about fertilizer, we should get that going immediately. Planting, we should get rolling with that as well. Some things that go on in season, if we're talking about foliar fungicide or things like that, we can do that after planting. We can still get things like that set up. So it's kind of a rolling basis throughout the year. And then, even late summer, we should start thinking about cover crop studies, or if there's going to be anything with fall fertilizers going down, that needs to be starting to plan late summer. So it just like the farming season progresses with different inputs and things going on throughout the season, we kind of follow that same pattern and just try to stay a little bit ahead of it. So.
And I would echo that, in my case, I work with my local crop production specialist, and there are a number of them across the state. And you do need to work with them, because you can't wait till April 30th to get your planting protocol set up, because they don't have time to get it done. So the sooner the better. I'll be honest, I have not sat down with Sarah yet. So I haven't yet decided what all we're doing this year, Laura, but I'm sure it'll be more than one or two. It'll probably be 3 or 4. I've got a couple ideas that we're going to do, and it's going to be, we're doing on multiple crops, because both corn, soybeans, and wheat, we're going to do studies on. So.
Good. Well, it was really great here. I don't see any other questions right now, unless you guys have any other final comments. It was really great to hear from both of you today. And thank you everyone for joining us. A recording of the webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also register for upcoming webinars. You can join us next Thursday for a look at the latest cattle inventory report and how herd liquidation may be impacting inventory and prices in 2023 and 2024. We would also really appreciate your feedback on the brief evaluation that there's a link in the chat box that Ryan just put up. So that helps tell us today how things went and inform us for future webinars. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the sunshine before it gets cold again, really cold again. All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.